So if you edit one of your own photos in Photoshop, but you use generative AI fill, do you lose at least some of your copyright, all of your copyright? Does Adobe get some of that copyright? Does your photo become public domain? These are valid questions because over the last year we have seen where artists have lost out their copyrights because it was generated by AI. Well, there are some differences out there. I've dug into this, so I want to dig into it in this episode, explain all the levels of this because it really will depend on how you use generative AI fill. But first, as a general disclaimer, I'm a photographer, I'm not an attorney. So if you want professional legal advice, I do recommend that you do seek out counsel from a licensed attorney. I will, though, be providing a lot of information in this video, and I will also have links to various documents, precedents, and whatnot down in the description of this video, along with other useful information. I'd also like to encourage this as an open discussion, so please feel free to leave comments below and any questions that you do have concerning this. Couple things though before you do, I would ask that you watch the entire video as there is a lot of information in here that I will be covering, and some of that may just answer some of those questions that you may have. The second issue, to keep this discussion helpful to the entire community, I would ask that you refrain from any speculative comments and things that are unsubstantiated. That way we can stay on track and we all are able to help each other and get the right answers that we need. And one of those facts is that earlier this year, in March 2023, the United States Copyright Office, the Library of Congress, did come out with a ruling, and I want to talk some about that because that ruling does set precedents, and they're already starting to address AI and especially how works of art are being submitted to them for copyright. And in some cases, you can copyright your work, but in some cases, you can't. But that was taken out of context by many because many on the internet were doing what happens on the internet, and they were touting unsubstantiated claims, giving out false information, and so it really left a lot of people making false assumptions. So let's dig into that a little further. So essentially, the Copyright Office breaks this down into two areas that really could be copyrighted or couldn't be copyrighted. Cover the first real quick. Basically, if you have an entire image generated by AI, that's probably not going to be copyrightable. The idea here is that if you were to put in something into a text prompt, essentially what you're doing is you're just giving instructions to somebody who's commissioning your work and to an artist, and in this case, the artist would be the machine, not you. You were just giving instructions, so there is no human authorship that's involved. And that's key as we go forward here, taking a look at a few other aspects of this, but the human authorship is key. So think about a blank document like this. So this is just me playing around with a few renditions of generative AI fill, and I started out with just a blank document. There was nothing here. What I did was just select everything, and then I could type something down in generative fill. So what I did first was I did here, and I said in this, I would like to see a beach scene at sunset. So a beach scene with islands in the background at sunset. So that's what I did when I was using this AI prompt here. So creating this, I don't have any copyright to that. I had no human intervention here. There was no human authorship that was involved. So this would not be copyrighted. But editing an image, that is different. In fact, it is very different. Let's go to this other example. And you might recall this. This is something that I showed in that other episode when this officially became released. I started with this image here, and this had things that I wanted to remove. This car, this truck, and then the semi-trailer over here. So I did 3 different generative AI fills over here. One here to get rid of the semi. I did one over here. It got rid of that car. And then the next one got rid of the truck. Now, there were some options, and you saw when I went through, there was a few little mistakes that went along the way, including this here, which means that what I would do is I would then combine all these. I'd stamp the layers. I would then do my own editing. So if we go in over here, I finished working with this beyond what AI could do with this. So in this case, even if I hadn't done that, because the image had this human authorship, right? What I had actually done, I used my camera, I took this picture, it is predominantly me, and everything that I did, just because I added in a few little blocks of AI doesn't mean that anybody else gets copyright of that. So because of this, the Library of Congress in their ruling goes on to say a few things. The first thing they say is, and I'm quoting here, in other cases, when they're not talking about then just an entire image, they're talking about other cases, then a work containing AI-generated material will also contain sufficient human authorship to support a copyright claim. For example, a human may select or arrange AI-generated material in a sufficiently creative way that the resulting work as a whole constitutes an original work of authorship. They go on to say that in these cases, copyright will only protect the human-authored aspects of the work which are independent of and do not affect the copyright status of the AI-generated material itself. And then they also say this policy does not mean that technological tools cannot be part of the creative process. And this is key. This is something that I thought was very key because they say that authors have long used such tools to create their works or to recast, transform, or adapt their expressive authorship. For example, a visual artist who uses Adobe Photoshop to edit an image remains the author of the modified image. And lastly, the point that I want to make is when they said, what matters is the extent to which the human had creative control over the work's expression and actually formed the traditional elements of authorship. So in this case, all that falls into line to say, I have copyright to this image. From everything that they're saying, it can be interpreted that yes, I have complete copyright to that. This would obviously be different because these were completely generated by generative fill. I had nothing to do with it. But what does Adobe, though, say about this? So that's the Library of Congress, that's copyright in the US. But when it comes to Adobe, things are a little bit different. In fact, Adobe does state that they consider that the input and output of generative AI are, as they quote, customer content. So if we were to then define customer content, Adobe states that the customer owns all right, title, and interest in and to all customer data, customer content, but it is subject to Adobe's underlying intellectual property rights. So to take that even further, to clarify what they mean by intellectual property, Adobe also states that as between Adobe and the customer owns and controls Firefly outputs, that's what comes out of generative fill, subject to the terms of the customer agreement. The user is responsible for use of the output is the user's confidential information, and most importantly, Adobe does not assert any IP rights in the output. So what does this mean when it comes to your photos? The first question I asked, you're using Photoshop, you're editing one of your own photos, what does this mean? Well, first and foremost, Adobe just wants to wash their hands of it and they're putting the onus on you. It also will depend on what country you are in. In the US, there's already now precedents and there are laws that will inevitably change, but do protect you under a lot of circumstances. The second takeaway from this is that if you are using generative AI to completely make an image, then you probably don't have any copyright claim to that whatsoever. If you are using, though, generative AI to edit a portion of an image, depending on the amount of AI that's put in there, it will determine really if you have copyright claim to that. In most cases, it will apply and you still will have copyright. You're using it like I showed in this example where you're just removing those items, where I was removing the cars, I removed that semi-truck. Of course, I'd have copyright claim to that, especially since it was just a tool that I was using out of many other tools that were used in Photoshop. Laws are also changing as we go forward. AI still is emerging and the legal system is still playing catch up with it. But as these things evolve, as they come out, I'll keep you posted.